And the opposition forces have direct route all the way to Tripoli. They don't want that to happen. But at the moment, it's very confusing what's happening exactly.
Indeed, the opposition fighters are now saying they've repelled an attack by government forces on the town of Misrata. That is in the west of the country. Both sides are laying claim to the area. These are pictures released by the Gaddafi government on Saturday. Gaddafi's forces attacked with tanks and artillery, and reports say that at least 18 people lost their lives there. Misrata is the largest opposition-held town outside the east of Libya. Now, at least 8 British citizens being held by rebel forces in Libya have been released. 7 of them were Special Forces soldiers, and they were captured, along with a UK diplomat, close to the eastern city of Benghazi. British government apparently says they were trying to make diplomatic contact with the opposition's National Council. The Libyan government reports in Tripoli heavy machine gun fire was heard at dawn. Where it came from, unclear, but the government claims it was in celebration at the supposed end of the war. Anita McNaught is in Tripoli for us.
There's a constant refrain in this crowd. The people are happy, but AlJazeera knows nothing. Extremely festive crowd. Excuse me for a moment. This extremely festive crowd, people are celebrating what they believe are significant strategic gains by Muammar Gaddafi's forces against the rebels here. But this celebration, such as it is, has been going on since before dawn. Before dawn, the sound of gunfire across the city. They're telling us that gunfire was merely in celebration. And it's true, they're both firing automatic rifles here and they're letting off volleys from anti-aircraft batters near the port. That is government forces, but the sound of gunfire through the city has been echoing for hours now. Has it all been celebratory? It's very hard to tell.
In the Egyptian capital, witnesses say the army has fired warning shots after crowds tried to storm another government building. Let's talk to AlJazeera's Ayman Mohyeddin, who's on the line from the Egyptian capital. First of all, Ayman, tell us where you are and what you've seen or heard.
David, a short while ago, we moved to Tahrir Square, Liberation Square, which is about a half-kilometer away from the Ministry of Interior. That's where today's protests were really focused. We were there about 45 minutes ago, just as reports that the army had fired in the air to try to dispel some of those protesters were winding down. And there were some clashes between the protesters that had gathered to try to enter the building and some what seems to be local residents from the area. And apparently, as they were telling me, thugs that were wielding sticks. Now, in the area that we were driving around, we did see some men with knives and steel rods, so we did not see any direct clashes between the protesters and these men. And now the situation seems to have quieted down in that area as the crowds have now moved back to Liberation Square. We're talking about 1,000 people or so.
But, Ayman, this is not the first time that the protesters have tried to get into this building, or at least a building associated with state security, and met with resistance.
That's right. In fact, it's a pattern that's repeated itself over the past 72 hours across various state security buildings all across Egypt's governorate. What we saw yesterday, perhaps the more iconic images, and that was one of the main buildings, perhaps the operational headquarters of state security in a Cairo suburb. The protesters gathered as they did today by, late afternoon, hoping to get into the building, because over the past few days, the reports that were coming out were that senior officers within the state security were shredding documents, destroying evidence, or anything that could possibly implicate them. And that really angered a lot of the protesters who wanted to see some of these individuals brought to justice, like other former regime officials. So they've essentially been gathering outside these state security buildings trying to get in, but they tried to get into the main one today, the headquarters, and the military was not having any of it. They essentially fired in the air to prevent them. Now, that also comes after an order by the general prosecutor for this building to be sealed. Earlier today, he ordered for the building to be sealed so that evidence can be gathered that could implicate any senior officials or regime officials. That's why the military, perhaps today, took a very strong-handed approach in not letting these demonstrators in the building.
Thank you, Ayman Mohyeddin in Cairo. Well, that country's ruling military council has been busy in the last 3 days, giving more ground to those who toppled the previous president. 3 new cabinet members have been named, and it looks like an attempt to purge the last of Hosni Mubarak's government. Nabil El Arabi is to take up the foreign minister's post, a former judge at the International Court of Justice. The new Interior Minister, Mansour El-Assawi, is vowing to improve the image of the police force. And the new Justice Minister, also making pledges, Mohammed Al-Gouindi, says he's looking forward to fighting corruption and overseeing elections. Well, this is Lebanon. Streets of the capital, Beirut. Thousands of people unhappy with the sectarian political system, which they say is unfair because it splits key government roles along religious lines. The president must be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the parliament speaker a Shiite Muslim. The crowds want a secular system instead. In Bahrain, the protests still continuing in the capital, Manama, as the campaign for democratic reform there enters its third week. Demonstrators are still camped out at Pearl Roundabout, the centre of the anti-government protests. Thousands more were blocking the entrance to the Prime Minister's office at Gudabia Palace on Sunday. Police with riot shields stood behind a gate and prevented them from disrupting a cabinet meeting. The Shia majority has long complained of discrimination and political persecution in the island kingdom. The Sunni Muslim Khalifa family rules Bahrain, a country which is a strategic US ally, home to the US Fifth Fleet. Saudi Arabia has now banned all demonstrations after a series of minor protests in the oil-producing eastern province. Mainly Shia demonstrators gathered in the towns of Khatif and Hufuf on Thursday and Friday. They've been demanding the release of all prisoners being held without trial, as well as better access to jobs. Now, these are very rare pictures to come out of Saudi Arabia, been published online on the protests in Khatif. It appears to show heavily armed police confronting protesters who are chanting anti-government slogans. The video is linked online to the March the 11th Facebook campaign, which calls for a day of protest against the ruling Al Saud family. Oman's Sultan Qaboos has replaced 3 of his cabinet ministers after days of violent unrest. Protesters want more jobs and better political representation, they say. Workers have been staging a sit-in at the main oil field in Haima, wanting more investment from the state. And in Yemen, at least 40 pro-democracy protesters have been wounded in clashes with government loyalists. The fighting was in Ib city, south of the capital, Sana'a. Witnesses say they heard gunfire and saw government supporters wielding batons and throwing stones. Now, Yemen is allegedly a hub for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. The US therefore worried that all of this upheaval across the Arab world could further destabilize Yemen. More from Kimberly Halkett.
As thousands of anti-government protesters continue to rally in Yemen, in Washington, lawmakers meet to discuss what they say is now America's most urgent national security threat.
The ramifications are all going to be very real as we look at the changing nature of what's going on in Yemen, a protected stronghold for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula.
The al-Qaeda group has been on Washington's radar for some time. It's suspected of waging a campaign to radicalize U.S. citizens, even inspiring Nidal Hassan, the man charged